Barbara Hamburg was found murdered on her front lawn, beaten, her throat slashed. No signs of forced entry, no arrests, no justice. But her son, Madison, wasn't ready to let her memory fade. He picked up a camera and turned it toward the people who raised him. This is a story about family, secrets, money, and the murder that still haunts Madison, Connecticut. Before the crime scene, before the blood dried on the lawn of a tidy Connecticut home, before the headlines and hushed courtroom speculations and the years of silence broken by a son with a camera, there was just Barbara. Not a victim, not a mystery, just a girl trying to find her way out of shadows she didn't create. She was born Barbara Lund in the 1960s in Madison, Connecticut. The oldest daughter in a family that looked perfect from the outside. Upper middle class, Catholic, traditional. Her father worked in insurance. Her mother stayed home, elegant and cold in her quiet discipline. The household ran on order, secrecy and reputation. Barbara learned young that emotions were private and appearances were paramount. Smiles were armor, cracks were unacceptable. But Barbara had a light to her. She was funny, clever, fierce when she wanted something. She had an eye for people, for moods, the kind of intuition only children of quiet dysfunction develop. She wanted more than Madison, more than tennis clubs and clipped conversations. She wanted passion, movement, joy, all the things that could never be spoken aloud at her family's dinner table. She met Jeffrey Hamburg in the 1980s. He was sharp, successful, and older, a Yale graduate who worked in energy finance. He came from wealth and walked like he never doubted his place in the world. They met at a dinner party thrown by mutual friends. Barbara was drawn to him instantly. He was worldly, articulate, and dressed with a kind of tailored power. He liked her laugh, her wit, and the fact that she didn't behave like a woman who needed him. Not yet. They married quickly. By the mid-90s, they were living in a beautiful house just minutes from the Long Island Sound, raising 2 children, Madison and Allie, in a neighborhood lined with perfectly trimmed hedges and quiet neighbors. On paper, they were the picture of success, but paper burns easily. Behind closed doors, the marriage was unraveling. Jeffrey was cold, domineering, brilliant, but emotionally distant. His wealth bought silence and control. He expected perfection. Barbara, already conditioned to endure detachment, tried to mold herself to his world. She kept the house immaculate, raised the children with warmth, and smiled at cocktail parties as though nothing was wrong. But something was wrong. Deeply. There were fights. About money, about control, about Barbara wanting to reclaim pieces of herself that had been chipped away during the marriage. She had started talking about going back to school, about working, about standing on her own. Jeffrey didn't like that. Independence was dangerous. So the fights escalated. Bitter words, veiled threats, and eventually court filings. In 2002, they divorced. It was messy, public. Jeffrey was powerful, connected. Barbara had the kids, the house, and a slim share of assets. She began rebuilding. But rebuilding alone. She took classes, found odd jobs, and stayed involved in the kids' lives. Madison was growing into a creative, sensitive young man with a camera always near his hand. Allie was still a child, soft-voiced and smart. Barbara kept going for them, always smiling, always moving forward, even when the nights were long and money was tight. But there were things she didn't tell people. Struggles buried beneath the surface. Barbara had found a community of women, other single moms, divorcees, survivors of domestic manipulation. They weren't PTA moms. They were sharper, more bruised, more awake. They called themselves gifting tables. But it was more than a friendship circle. It was a secret financial network. Some called it a sisterhood, others a pyramid scheme. Women would join by giving a gift, usually around $5,000, to the woman at the top of the table. That table would eventually split into 2 new tables, with new women giving new gifts, climbing toward their own payday. It was technically illegal, but it operated in quiet kitchens, over wine, and whispered affirmations about financial freedom and feminine abundance. Barbara believed in it, needed it. She rose quickly in the ranks. She brought others in, but as with all things that rise fast, there was a fall. In late 2009, Connecticut authorities began cracking down on gifting tables. Women were being investigated. Bank records were being pulled. People were turning on each other. Barbara had profited, not millions, but enough to matter, and there were whispers that she was going to talk, or sue, or expose others who had climbed past her. She became paranoid, started checking locks twice, began journaling daily, writing names, fears, suspicions. She had started suspecting that some of her old friends, women she had once called sisters, were trying to isolate her. At the same time, her legal battle with Jeffrey reignited. He owed her thousands in unpaid alimony. He claimed he was broke. She claimed he was hiding money in foreign accounts. Depositions were scheduled, subpoenas were threatened, and behind all of it, Madison, now a young adult and film student, had started quietly recording, not for YouTube, not for justice, for himself, to understand the family no one ever talked about truthfully. March 3rd, 2010. Barbara sent a few text messages that morning, routine ones. She had a court appearance coming up, and she was supposed to pick up her daughter from school that afternoon, but she never arrived. At 3:43 p.m., Allie walked through the front door of the home on Middle Beach Road. She screamed. Her mother was sprawled on the lawn beside the house, half concealed by a row of bushes. Blood pooled around her. Her face was beaten, her throat slashed, her body cold. There was no sign of forced entry, no robbery, no theft, no weapons found, just violence. Brutal. Personal Barbara Hamburg had been murdered, and no one, not then, not now, has ever been charged. The scream brought neighbors to their windows. Police arrived minutes later. The first officer on the scene reported seeing the body as he approached the driveway. Blood soaked into the dirt beside a patch of frozen grass, the limbs arranged. Not naturally, but with some strange symmetry, as if whoever had killed her couldn't quite decide whether to leave her displayed or concealed. The sight was jarring. This was Madison, Connecticut. Crime here meant stolen bikes, not homicide scenes. The victim was quickly identified as Barbara Hamburg, 48 years old, divorced, mother of 2, no known enemies. But as officers began their preliminary sweep, the story that would begin to unfold was anything but simple. Inside the house, nothing was missing. There was no sign of struggle, no forced entry, no smashed glass or overturned furniture. Her purse was untouched, her jewelry still in place. The kitchen looked undisturbed. Police found the morning's coffee half drunk on the counter. The only thing out of place was everything. Madison arrived shortly after his sister's call. He stood on the sidewalk outside the police tape, watching the house that had once held his entire childhood, now cordoned off like a crime scene from one of his student films. His hands shook. He couldn't speak. He tried to reach Ali, but she was already inside a patrol car, wrapped in a blanket, her face white and unreadable. The questions hadn't even started yet, but already he felt the silence pressing down on him like a weight. Detectives began to question those closest to Barbara. They spoke with friends, ex-co-workers, neighbors, and then they sat down with the family, with Madison, with Ali, and eventually with Barbara's ex-husband, Jeffrey Hamburg. It didn't take long for suspicions to bloom. Jeffrey was evasive. From the beginning, he claimed he hadn't seen Barbara that day, hadn't spoken to her recently, and expressed surprise at her death, but not grief. His financial dealings were messy. Records showed he was behind on tens of thousands in alimony, and Barbara had filed court motions to hold him in contempt. Some believed she was preparing to expose him for financial manipulation, offshore accounts, undisclosed income, quiet deals. If those allegations had gained traction, he could have faced jail time. Motive, maybe, but there was no physical evidence linking him to the scene. No DNA, no eyewitnesses, no surveillance, just questions. And for now, questions weren't enough. Madison couldn't let it go. He was only 18 at the time, barely more than a boy himself. But in the weeks after the funeral, a small, solemn gathering where everyone watched each other too closely, he started recording. First with a handheld camera, then with a more professional rig. He said he was working on a documentary, but it wasn't about film. It was survival, understanding, maybe even justice. He interviewed everyone who would speak to him, friends of Barbara, old acquaintances, women from the gifting tables, family members, even his own father. The camera gave him permission to ask what no one else would. Who hated her enough to kill her? Some interviews were evasive, some tearful, some strangely cold. Everyone had a theory, but no one had answers. Barbara's sister, Conway, gave a cryptic response in one early recording. "You don't know everything about your mom," she said, eyes glassy. "There were things, deeper things. It's not what you think." He asked what she meant. She wouldn't say. Conway, like others, was connected to the gifting tables. So was Madison's Aunt Jill. They had all participated, profited, and at times clashed. One woman suggested Barbara had been threatening to expose them to the IRS or to law enforcement. Another insisted she was about to sue one of the upper tier women for fraud. Motive? Maybe. But again, no proof. Just whispers and paranoia. Madison found another thread in the financials. Bank records showed unusual withdrawals in the months leading up to Barbara's death. Checks that had been voided. Funds moved between accounts. He believed someone was helping her hide money or that she was being extorted. When he tried to obtain her court case documents from the divorce proceedings, he discovered some records had been sealed. Others were missing. Still, the police made no arrest. The case grew cold. Years passed. Madison continued filming. He spoke to prosecutors, pushed detectives, asked family members questions they refused to answer. The deeper he dug, the murkier the water became. Everyone had secrets. Everyone had something to hide. But was any of it deadly? He came to suspect almost everyone. His father, who had the most financial motive, and who was allegedly at home alone during the time of the murder, with no confirmed alibi. His aunt, who had a complex, possibly envious, relationship with Barbara, and once said, "I think some people wanted her gone." Even his own grandmother, who had written Barbara out of her will just months before her death. In one heart-wrenching scene caught on film, Madison asks a family member outright, "Did you have anything to do with her death?" The silence that followed was more damning than any confession. When Madison finally released his documentary, Murder on Middle Beach, in 2020, it wasn't just a film. It was an open wound, 4 parts, aired on HBO, each frame saturated with grief, suspicion, and a desperate search for meaning. It didn't offer neat answers. It wasn't a courtroom drama with a gavel-slamming climax. It was messier than that, realer, and it hit the audience like a slow-building storm, not because of the murder alone, but because of the family wrapped around. The documentary wasn't just about Barbara's death. It was about the legacy of secrecy, the generational dysfunction, and the emotional fallout that occurs when a life ends without justice. It was about the way people remember. Selectively, defensively, sometimes dishonestly. Madison was not just a filmmaker. He was a son navigating a minefield of trauma, betrayal, and buried truths. The public responded with empathy and horror. Barbara's murder, once a cold local case, was suddenly a national conversation. Reddit threads exploded. Viewers dissected every scene, every hesitation, every blink and pause from family members caught on camera. Some declared that Jeffrey had to be involved. Others pointed to the gifting table women, the financial pressure, the silence from those closest to her. Still others, more cautiously, acknowledged the terrifying possibility that it might have been someone. No one suspected at all. Jeffrey Hamburg never participated in the documentary. He gave brief on-camera interviews, appearing emotionally distant, legally careful, and always evasive. When Madison asked him directly, "Did you kill Mom?" Jeffrey didn't answer with anger or grief. He said, "I didn't do anything wrong," and left the room. For many viewers, that line stuck. It wasn't "I didn't kill her," it was legalese, precision, a phrase that sounded less like mourning and more like strategy, but there was no arrest, no charges, no breakthrough. Law enforcement claimed they were still investigating, but nothing changed. The Connecticut State Police stated they had reopened the case after the documentary aired, that they were reviewing new leads, but time had already erased so much. Physical evidence lost, memories faded, witnesses dead or disappeared. Whatever trail existed had long since gone cold. For Madison, the release of the documentary didn't bring peace. It brought more questions. More people reached out. Women from the gifting table who had never spoken. Former friends of Barbara who had stories to share. A few cryptic phone calls. One voicemail, anonymous, simply said, "You're getting close. Stop." He turned it over to the police. Nothing came of it. He began to dream of her again. Not just the murder, her laugh, the way she folded laundry while humming. The quiet moments in the car when they'd drive along the coast, windows down, and she'd say, "You're going to do something important, Madison." Those memories didn't live in courtrooms or evidence lockers. They lived in fragments, in the color of the light that morning, in the way the house sounded when it was too quiet. Ali, his sister, stepped further away from the public eye. Her trauma was different. She had found her mother. She had never really stopped seeing that moment, the blood, the stillness. In interviews, she was careful, soft-spoken, burdened. She wanted peace more than answers. She just wanted it to be over. But Madison couldn't stop. He kept editing, researching, documenting. He returned to the site where his mother was found. The grass had grown back. The bushes had been trimmed. A new family now lived in the house. The neighborhood was quiet again, the way it always had been. But something lingered in the air, not just the echo of the crime, but the weight of what hadn't happened since. Justice had not come. No one had confessed, and Barbara Hamburg, vibrant, flawed, loving, furious, complex, remained not just a cold case file, but a ghost that would not rest. Sometimes Madison would stand on the shore of Long Island Sound, camera in hand, and just breathe. The waves didn't care who remembered. The tide didn't bring answers. But he kept going, because silence had killed her once, and silence was not going to win. Again,